Ace Attorney is a series that is centralized around one key concept: defending your client from murder charges. It naturally goes much deeper than that simple synopsis, but if you ask me to summarize the games with just one phrase, then that's probably what I would say. Almost every adventure that Phoenix Wright and his associates have gone on have begun with them being tasked with defending someone who stands accused of committing murder. From there, their willpower is tested time and time again as they fight for their client, and what ultimately allows them to win the day is their undying trust in that client. No matter how bad things may look, no matter how guilty they may seem, Ace Attorney is about believing in your client no matter what until the very end. Most of the time. You see, this central theme of believing in your client works because the client in question is almost always innocent, but that isn't always the case. In fact, there are two separate instances where the client in question actually is guilty of what they are accused of, and those characters help to make for some of the most unique and interesting cases in the entire series. These characters are the great Ace Attorneys Magnus McGilded and Justice for All's Matt Engarde, who both begin as fairly simple clients, but quickly grow and evolve into becoming some of the series' most heinous, manipulative, and engaging villains once their true selves are finally revealed. Ace Attorney's two guilty clients are fascinating to me because they completely flip the series' main theme on its head and force players to consider questions that they may not have had to consider before. Questions such as, what is more important, defending my client or pursuing the truth? Furthermore, these characters force each game's respective protagonist, Ryunosuke Naruhodo and Phoenix Wright, to grapple with difficult questions themselves as they deal with this unique conflict, which contributes greatly to their character development overall. A great villain is able to challenge the beliefs of the protagonist and make them question themselves, because overcoming that villain will allow the protagonist to emerge with greater resolve than ever before. With all that said, let's take a look at Ace Attorney's only two guilty clients in order to determine how they shake things up in their respective games, how they challenge the protagonist in unique ways, and how they manage to establish themselves as some of Ace Attorney's most memorable villains of all time. Beginning with Magnus McGilded. As the successor to who was once the only guilty client in the Ace Attorney series, Magnus McGilded had some pretty big shoes to fill. And while I don't believe he was quite able to reach the same heights as his predecessor did, the impact that he made on the great Ace Attorney story as a whole is undeniable. When players first encounter Magnus McGilded, he presents himself as a rich philanthropist who spends his time tossing excessive amounts of money to those who are less fortunate, which most certainly includes Ryunosuke Naruhodo and Susato Mikotoba. On the surface, this makes it seem as if he's a morally righteous man, but like with many philanthropists depicted in media, McGilded's personality contrasts with his supposed goodness, as he presents himself as incredibly pompous and sketchy, with the natural question of where he got all of his wealth naturally coming to the player's mind. While he does definitely come off as untrustworthy, I want to make it clear that he does so in a sleazy way rather than in a nefarious way. It's obvious that players shouldn't really trust a word this guy says, but they can at least be fairly certain that he's innocent when they first meet him, especially because he isn't the first of his kind in the Ace Attorney series. In fact, there have been plenty of clients throughout the series who are questionable at best and criminals in their own right at worst. So McGilded fits perfectly into that group of characters without raising any major alarms. From there, McGilded takes the back seat while the case focuses on introducing its new prosecutor, Barrick Van Zeeks, as well as new game mechanics like the summation examinations. Van Zeeks does make a point out of exposing McGilded as a moneylender, but that is quite frankly not all too surprising given how he carried himself. Overall, things feel fairly standard for a time, but they soon begin to feel off once McGilded himself takes the stand to defend himself. Once he does, he makes an effort to take control of the case himself, introducing new facts that were not previously mentioned and even revealing a brand new witness that no one else knew about, Gina Lestrade, who I've already made a whole video for. Furthermore, observant players will be able to pick up on key elements of the omnibus that the crime took place in changing as the trial progresses, namely the compartment that Gina supposedly hid in and the bloodstains contained inside the omnibus. Eventually, Van Zeeks takes notice of these things and objects, pushing for Ryunosuke to acknowledge the fact that something isn't right. And when he does, Magnus McGilded begins to show some of his true colors. McGilded flies into a rage and questions why Ryunosuke is doubting him as his lawyer, making it all too clear that he had a plan and that Ryunosuke is now interfering with that plan. But despite their opposition, neither Van Zieks nor Ryunosuke are able to ultimately stop McGilded from getting away with his crimes, resulting in what is debatably the most hollow and empty-feeling not guilty verdict in the series. Magnus McGilded is a very interesting villain to me because he took many notes from his predecessor, yet he was able to stand out by choosing to employ those elements at a very unexpected time in the game's story. The Adventure of the Runaway Room is the third case in a brand new setting for the Ace Attorney series that was still very much in the middle of introducing its characters, mechanics, and overarching themes. So the player really isn't expecting such a shakeup to the norm to happen before the norm is even properly established in the first place. Some may consider this to be bad writing, but I personally can't help but think of it as a genius mix-up that's made to catch the player off guard and show them that the Great Ace Attorney is different from what came before it, and that it isn't messing around. Throughout the case, small hints pointing towards Magnus McGilded's true nature are hidden all around. Some are in plain sight, and some take a keen eye to spot, but the clues are present regardless. And these clues only continue to build and build until they finally cannot be ignored for any longer. There's no single moment that I can point to as the moment that players are meant to realize the truth because the game is able to lead them to that truth naturally and seamlessly, which is genius writing that secretly teaches the player something about its narrative. Magnus McGilded teaches the player to not take everything at face value and to doubt what they are shown, which is an important lesson for the player to keep in mind as they progress through the duology. On one hand, I do find it odd that the devs decided to throw players for a loop before they even properly settled them in. And I do think it makes the first Great Ace Attorney game as a whole feel like one of the more oddly structured games in the series. But on the other hand, I can't help but appreciate the devs' willingness to do something unorthodox in order to show how not everyone can be trusted, even when they normally should be according to the typical structure of the games. And unlike with his counterpart, the player is at no point able to truly bring Magnus McGilded to justice themselves. So while he would quickly receive what was coming to him in some form or fashion, both the player and Ryunosuke are left with a sinking feeling in their chest following the adventure of the Runaway Room, creating an intense internal conflict that is then explored and eventually resolved in the cases that follow. Magnus McGilded is one of the many examples of why the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles has some of the most excellent writing in the entire franchise. In just a single case, he's able to subvert expectations, set the stage for the narrative that is to follow, and leave an impact that, even after completing the duology, can still be felt. Yet, even with all of that in mind, he still pales in comparison to Ace Attorney's first major subversion of expectations, Matt Engarde. As I previously stated, Magnus McGilded certainly performed his role as a villain admirably during the adventure of the Runaway Room, but I firmly believe that the manipulation, ruthlessness, and pure evil of his predecessor, Matt Engarde, is still completely unmatched to this day. As the final case of the second Ace Attorney game in the original trilogy, Farewell My Turnabout is quite noteworthy for being the first case in the series to seriously shake up the formula in a major way, as the case begins with Maya Fey being kidnapped by who would come to be known as Shelly the Killer, the most cold, calculated, and efficient assassin in the world of Ace Attorney. After kidnapping Maya, the Killer contacts Phoenix Wright via a transceiver and makes him aware of the situation, promising only to spare Maya's life and return her to him if Phoenix can secure an acquittal for a man by the name of Matt Engarde, who stands accused of murdering his rival, Juan Corrida, in the Gatewater Imperial Hotel. When Phoenix decides to visit the man himself, Engarde presents himself as a fairly aloof celebrity who fails to grasp the situation that he's in. He fulfills the role of the typical dim-witted superstar who has lost his grasp on reality due to being born with a metaphorical silver spoon in his mouth. However, Engarde turns down Phoenix's offer to defend him until Phoenix accidentally mentions the Killer's name, causing him to finally cooperate. This immediately hints towards Engarde potentially knowing more than he lets on, but the doubt and uncertainty in the player's heart is quickly expelled when Phoenix asks Engarde if he was responsible for Juan Corrida's death. Engarde responds by reassuring Phoenix that he didn't kill anyone, and when he does, there is a complete lack of psych locks, which were introduced in this game as a main mechanic to indicate to Phoenix when someone is lying. And so, while the case as a whole still certainly has a sketchy feeling throughout, players can at least be certain for a time that Matt Engarde is innocent, allowing them to focus on the details of the case itself. And as they do, clues begin to point towards Adrian Andrews, Engarde's manager, being the true culprit behind Juan Corrida's death, as Phoenix is able to prove in court that she manipulated the crime scene in multiple ways in order to make it seem as if Engarde was the culprit. However, as Phoenix presses on in his indictment of Andrews, things feel significantly more off than they typically do. Rather than reveal her nefarious and antagonistic side to the court as Ace Attorney culprits tend to do when they're backed into a corner, Andrews acts considerably more weak and vulnerable, pleading for her innocence and begging Phoenix to believe her. Phoenix is conflicted, but the trial is thankfully cut short before a verdict is handed down, due to Miles Edgeworth, the prosecutor handling the case, noticing the card that Adrian Andrews found at the crime scene, which just so happens to be the calling card of Shelley the Killer. During the following investigation, Phoenix and Edgeworth begin to slowly peel back the layers of this unexpectedly complex case. And as they do, they begin to find pieces of evidence that hint towards Matt Engarde being more nefarious than he initially seemed to be, such as a hidden video camera that Engarde placed within Juan Corrida's room, or the fact that Shelley the Killer is hiding out in Engarde's mansion while disguised as his butler, which, while evidence to the player, is unfortunately not evident to Phoenix. This all causes the player to feel incredibly uneasy, because they're not quite sure what to believe at this point. A dozen red flags are beginning to raise, and Engarde's innocence begins to feel less and less likely, yet the fact remains that no Cyclops appeared when he advocated for his innocence. By this point, Farewell My Turnabout has already cemented itself as a significantly more morally complex case than any case that came before it, as it extends far beyond simply believing in one's client. And it all culminates in Phoenix confronting Engarde with his newfound evidence. As when he does, Matt Engarde finally decides to shed his aloof persona and reveal his true colors, revealing himself to be the man who hired Shelley the Killer to assassinate Juan Corrida, kidnap Maya, and blackmail Phoenix into winning him a not guilty verdict. And as he does, he slides his hair back to reveal a set of scars on his face, and his theme is replaced by a significantly more sinister one. When Phoenix questions how he managed to lie about his culpability in Corrida's death, he responds by reiterating that he didn't kill anybody. After all, it was the work of the assassin he hired, meaning that Engarde told no lies whatsoever. I really can't emphasize enough how excellently done this reveal is. Players are immediately presented with a case that contains greater stakes and complexity than any case that came before it. Yet they're still led into a false sense of security thanks to Matt Engarde's cleverly worded lie preventing Cyclops from showing up. This allows the case to progress for quite some time without any major issues, but all the while, seeds of doubt are planted within the player's mind. These seeds are brushed aside as a result of the reassurance that they initially received, as well as what they know about the series up until that point. After all, a guilty client was unheard of before this case, so players have no real reason to believe that things will be different here. Despite that, the seeds of doubt in their mind only begin to blossom more and more, which all leads up to this reveal that shows them exactly how dire the position that they're in is. Maya's life depends on this man being declared not guilty, and he's nothing but a twisted, manipulative, downright evil villain who takes great joy in watching Phoenix squirm. For all of the 8 cases prior to this one, the innocence of the accused was never truly in question. So this case completely subverted the player's expectations and masterfully led them to this twist in order to be as impactful as possible and make the player's heart truly sink. And it serves to make Matt Engarde himself one of the most easy to hate villains in the entire series, because his betrayal is one that is entirely personal. He knew exactly what he was doing by manipulating Phoenix throughout the case, and he thinks it's hilarious. He brags on and on about how people are simply things to be used to him, and he relishes in the fact that he has everyone in this case working for him as a result of his deception. This is all what makes Engarde's eventual downfall one of the most sweet and satisfying ones in the entire series. After a long, stressful, terrifying trial, Phoenix is able to prove to Shelley the Killer that Matt Engarde betrayed his trust by secretly recording him when he assassinated Juan Corrida as a way to blackmail him if need be, as that's what his secret camera was for. And unfortunately for Engarde, there is nothing in the world that the Killer despises more than traitors. So he terminates his deal with Engarde on the spot and vows to follow him to the ends of the earth in order to exact his revenge. Rather than by the hands of a mysterious source like with Magnus McGilded, Engarde's downfall is directly at the hands of the player, making it oh so satisfying to watch him desperately plead for a guilty verdict, praying that the bars of prison will keep him safe from the Killer's grasp. Though I imagine that even that would ultimately not be enough. Farewell My Turnabout stands out as one of the greatest cases in all of Ace Attorney because it's never afraid to try something new. And when it does, it excels. Matt Engarde is a perfect example of this, as his villainy is unlike any in the entire series. Through his clever deception, the slow buildup of doubt, the haunting reveal, and his ultimate downfall, Matt Engarde stands out as something that, like the case that he originates from, has never fully been matched. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to let me know what your thoughts on Ace Attorney's guilty clients are down in the comments below. And while you're down there, consider hitting the subscribe button for more deep dives into all things Ace Attorney. For now though, that's all from me. Take care of yourselves.